You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon, and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. By the early 1700s, the big bosses of Poland and Lithuania, called magnates, had a tight grip on the state. Basically, they made sure nothing changed that could knock down their top dog status, known as the Golden Freedoms. They took advantage of a loophole called the liberum veto, which let any member of the Sejm, which was their version of Parliament, stop all proceedings if they didn't agree with what was going on. This could happen if a member was paid off by a magnate, influenced by foreign powers, or just thought everything was perfect in what they saw as a golden age. Because of this, their government was stuck in a standstill for over a century. Starting around the mid-1600s, some folks began to think it might be a good idea to shake things up and reform the Commonwealth. But not only did the magnates look at this idea with a side eye, so did the countries next door. These neighbours were quite happy seeing the Commonwealth not doing so well, and were definitely not thrilled about the possibility of it bouncing back stronger and more democracy-friendly. With the Commonwealth's military forces dwindling to about 16,000 soldiers, compared to the massive armies of its neighbours, 300,000 in the Imperial Russian Army, and 200,000 each in the Prussian Army and the Imperial Army of the Holy Roman Empire, it was all too easy for those neighbours to just step in and take control. During the Great Sejm from 1788 to 1792, Poland found a golden chance to reform itself. This was largely because its neighbours were too caught up in their wars to meddle in Polish matters. The Russian Empire and the Archduchy of Austria were busy fighting with the Ottoman Empire, and Russia was also clashing with Sweden. Poland saw an opening, and backed by a new alliance with Prussia, felt secure enough to adopt a revolutionary new constitution on the 3rd of May, 1791, met with widespread approval. However, the end of the conflicts involving Russia gave Tsarina Catherine the Great a chance to express her displeasure with Poland's new constitution, seeing it as a threat to Russia's dominant position over Poland. Alexander Bezborodko, one of Russia's top foreign policy figures, lamented, "The worst possible news have arrived from Warsaw. The Polish king has become almost sovereign." Similarly, Prussia, fearing a stronger Polish state that could demand back territories lost in the First Partition, did not hide its opposition. Prussian Foreign Minister Friedrich Wilhelm von Schulenburg-Keinert openly stated that Prussia would not support the Polish constitution nor assist the Commonwealth in any way. Not everyone in Poland was in favor of this constitution either. Key opponents like Franciszek Sawery-Branicki and Stanisław Szczęsny-Potocki formed the Targowica Confederation, criticizing the constitution as a source of democratic ideas and a threat to their privileges. They accused the constitution of initiating a revolution on the 3rd of May, 1791. The Confederation sought Tsarina Catherine's intervention to restore their statue, emphasizing her as a just and caring leader. In May 1792, following their solicitation, Russian forces under Catherine's orders invaded Poland and Lithuania, declaring war and igniting a conflict aimed at overturning the newly adopted constitution and its reforms. The Russian army, boasting nearly 98,000 soldiers led by Mikhail Krechetnikov and Mikhail Kakowski, held the upper hand in combat experience. Their strategy involved Kakowski moving through Ukraine to take cities on his way to Warsaw from the south, while Krechetnikov aimed to approach Warsaw from the north through a different route. They planned to join forces near Warsaw. The Russians were well informed about the Polish army thanks to their intelligence network in Poland, unlike the Poles who received mixed and often inaccurate information about Russian movements and were uncertain about the war's onset until Russian troops crossed their border. Stanisław August Poniatowski, the king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, nominally led the Polish forces but essentially delegated command to his nephew Prince Józef Poniatowski. Despite theoretical plans for a formidable army following recent reforms, the Polish forces numbered only 37,000, plagued by reorganization issues, equipment shortages, and a lack of experienced personnel. In the country's southeast, in what is now Ukraine, Polish divisions led by notable figures like Tadeusz Kościuszko, Michał Wilhorski, and Prince Poniatowski himself were initially separated, totaling between 17,000 and 24,000 troops. They faced a significantly larger Russian force of around 64,000 men under General Mikhail Kakowski, divided into 4 corps with varying strengths. The Targowica Confederates, expected to support the Russians, failed to garner significant popular support in Poland and were kept away from frontline duties by the Russians, who doubted their military value. In Lithuania, the Commonwealth's army was about 15,000 strong, with an extra 3,000 from a crown detachment, all under Duke Louis of Württemberg, who hadn't prepared for war. Kreshetnikov's forces in the area numbered between 33,700 and 38,000, also organized into 4 corps. An additional Polish force of about 8,000 was to gather in Warsaw as a reserve, commanded by King Poniatowski himself. Amidst this, Tadeusz Kościuszko proposed concentrating the Polish army for a decisive engagement to achieve numerical parity and lift the spirits of the inexperienced Polish forces through a swift victory. However, Prince Poniatowski rejected this plan. Interestingly, just a few months earlier, Poniatowski and Kościuszko had held opposite views regarding troop concentration. Poniatowski's strategy was to dodge major battles initially, hoping for the arrival of 30,000 Prussian reinforcements to level the playing field between the Russian and Polish forces. In the late hours of May 18th and into the 19th in 1792, Russian troops began their march into Ukraine, setting the stage for a clash that was more challenging than they anticipated. The Polish forces, commanded by notable leaders Prince Poniatowski and Tadeusz Kościuszko, were ready to face them. Kościuszko, meeting up with Prince Poniatowski near Janów by May 29th, found themselves up against a formidable Russian advance. Their army, not strong enough to directly confront the Russians advancing in 4 columns, strategically retreated towards Lubar and Połone, on the western side of the southern Bug River. In this retreat, Kościuszko led the defense from the back. Faced with a significant disadvantage in numbers and awaiting promised support from King Poniatowski, Prince Poniatowski made the decision to withdraw further to Volhynia. Here, the town of Połone was to be strengthened into a major point of defense, with Lubomirski assigned to gather necessary supplies. Despite their efforts, a setback occurred on June 14th at the Battle of Boruskocze, where Wielhorski's forces were overcome. However, by June 17th, Prince Poniatowski finally got the reinforcements he had been waiting for, around 2,000 troops led by Mikhail Lubomirski. The next day, the Polish forces, under Prince Poniatowski's leadership, managed to defeat a Russian unit at the Battle of Zielenice on June 18th. This victory was celebrated by King Poniatowski, who awarded the newly created Virtuti military medals to the soldiers and leaders of the campaign, marking the first issuance of such honors since the time of John III Sobieski. Despite this win, the Russian military kept pushing forward. Under Józef Poniatowski's command, the Poles conducted a strategic retreat, carefully avoiding a confrontational defeat. A significant blow came in early July near Dubno, when Mikhail Lubomirski, tasked with supplying the Polish forces, defected to the Russians, taking vital supplies with him or handing them over to the enemy. It took until late May for the king to formally dismiss Lubomirski from his duties, a delay caused by Lubomirski's influential position. By early July, most Polish forces had withdrawn from Ukraine. Kościuszko's troops engaged in a skirmish at Volodymyr-Wolyński on July 7th and later, on July 18th, fought to a draw against the Russians at the Battle of Dubienka. Despite being outnumbered, Kościuszko's 5,300 troops managed to hold off a force of 25,000 Russians. However, the Russian forces began to flank his position from across the Austrian border, forcing a Polish retreat from the Bug River. Yet this retreat didn't signify defeat. The Poles regrouped, prepared for further engagements closer to Warsaw, where they hoped to stand a better chance. In the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Russians made their move across the Commonwealth border on May 22nd, just 4 days later than they did in the south. Around this time, Poland found itself backstabbed by its supposed ally, the Kingdom of Prussia, which abruptly ended its alliance with Poland. To make matters worse, the Prussian commander in charge of Lithuania's forces, Duke Württemberg, turned his back on the Polish-Lithuanian effort, opting not to confront the Russians. Claiming illness in Wrocław, he kept away from the battle lines and sent mixed signals to his soldiers. As a result, the Lithuanian army barely put up a fight against the advancing Russian forces, continuously retreating. The city of Minsk was given up after a few minor clashes on May 31st. It wasn't until June 4th, when General Józef Józef took command, that the army attempted to resist the Russians. Unfortunately, they were defeated by the Russian army at the Battle of Mir on June 11th, allowing the Russians to keep pushing through the Grand Duchy. The Commonwealth's army was forced back towards Grodno. The Russians captured Wilno on June 14th after a brief fight with the local troops and went on to seize Nieswij on June 19th and Kaunas on June 20th, facing little to no resistance. The failed leadership of Józef saw him replaced by Majko Zabieło on June 23rd. From then, the Northern Theatre saw no major battles, even as the Polish army organized a retreat towards Warsaw, maintaining some form of order after a setback at Zelva and setting up defensive lines along the Bug River near Brest. The Russians continued their conquest, taking Grodno on July 5th and Białystok on July 17th. They captured Brest on July 23rd, defeating the defenders there, but suffered a defeat near Krzemianwyś on July 24th, marking the first significant victory for the Commonwealth on the northern front. While Prince Poniatowski and Kościuszko still believed they could win the war and planned to unite Polish-Lithuanian forces to overcome Russian troops, King Poniatowski, after consulting with his ministers, the guardians of the laws, opted to seek a ceasefire. Tsarina Catherine insisted that the king side with the Targowica Confederation, a pro-Russian aristocratic group. Faced with a divided cabinet, around July 22nd to 23rd, he conceded to her demands, effectively ending Prince Poniatowski's military efforts. The final battle took place on July 26 at Markusau in Lublin province, where Polish cavalry under Poniatowski successfully beat back an enemy assault. At the moment King Poniatowski chose to pursue peace, the Polish army was still strong, not having experienced a significant defeat or shortages. However, the king believed that Russian forces' larger numbers would inevitably lead to Polish defeat. He thought that negotiating with the Russians might yield better results and possibly lead to a new alliance. Although time would show his calculations to be incorrect, whether a different decision could have led to a better outcome remains a topic of historical debate. The ceasefire was unpopular within the Polish military ranks. Leaders like Kościuszko, Prince Poniatowski, and others openly criticized the king's choice, with many, including Kościuszko, resigning in protest in the weeks that followed. Prince Poniatowski went so far as to contemplate a rebellion against his uncle, even ordering the king's forcible bring to the army camp at one point, following the advice of more radical voices. However, he eventually chose not to defy his uncle's wishes and cancelled the order just before it was to be executed. A lot of Polish historians are on the same page, thinking it was a mistake for Poland to give up when it did, both from a military and a political standpoint. Militarily speaking, they believe Poland had a pretty solid chance to keep defending along the Vistula River and eventually tire out the Russian forces coming at them. Politically, if Poland had kept up the fight, it might have shown the countries trying to carve it up that their plan was going to be more trouble than it was worth. King Poniatowski really thought that throwing in the towel would lead to a diplomatic way out, but that idea fell apart quickly. With the Russian troops pressuring new parliament members through bribery or intimidation, a parliament session happened in the fall of 1793, known as the Grodno Sejm. Under a lot of pressure, on November 23, 1793, they wrapped up by throwing out the constitution and agreeing to the Second Partition. Russia grabbed a huge chunk of Poland's territory, about 250,000 square kilometers, or 97,000 square miles, and Prussia took 58,000 square kilometers, or 22,000 square miles. This deal cut Poland's population down to a third of what it had been before the First Partition left Poland a shadow of its former self, heavily under Russian influence and control. This whole outcome caught the Targowica Confederates off guard. They had only wanted to go back to how things were before the war, hoping to get rid of the reforms from the 3rd of May Constitution and not expecting much else to change. The last attempt to get the reformed Commonwealth back was through the Kościuszko uprising in 1794. Unfortunately, that effort didn't succeed and led to the Third Partition in 1795, which was the final blow, wiping Poland off the map as the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth came to an end. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.